Welcome, my constant reader friends. I'm Tad, and this is Tad Reads Books and Stuff. All right, so we're into June. I'm going to do a quick TBR for June, and then we are going to talk about 4 Past Midnight. Yep, the next book in my Shorty King's project. So we'll talk about this. That was finished last month, right at the end. So, as a little update, if you watch my channel, I am doing a read-along with Grozz on the GKBC. We are continuing our series of graphic novels, comic books that we read every 2 weeks. We give a little review, we do an update on what we're reading. Grozz came up with a good name. We're called the Marvelous Team Up. Thanks, Grozz. We have 1 video out so far of this. Next week, we'll be doing the second installment of Thirsty Mermaids by Kat Lee. Also, this month, I just started Dan Simmons' Hyperion. Again, another suggestion by Grozz on the GKBC. It's funny how he seems to give me ideas for things, I guess just making me read things that I've been wanting to read forever. He did that with Saga. I had Saga on my shelf for a long time, just needed a reason to read it. He gave it to me. This, of course, Hyperion, I've had the whole series, the Endymion series or whatever they call it, on my bookshelves forever. Of course, this cover just, I mean, when I first saw this cover when I was younger, I had to have this book, and I've never read it. He suggested we read it for June. That's what we're going to do. We're just going to promote this on the videos we do, and then when we get to the end of June, we'll do a recap and we'll talk about our feelings on Hyperion. So I've already started that, and I'm 102 pages in. Also, I'm going to start reading tomorrow Michael Moorcock, Elric of Melniboné. This is the Elric Saga Volume 1. Really cool issue of this. I had the second one on my shelf. I believe there's a total of 4 in all of the Elric stories. I'm going to be starting this one Monday, and I really can't wait to read it. I have read Michael Moorcock, but not Elric, which is kind of strange since that's probably his most famous subject. But we're going to start that tomorrow. Also, we will be getting into the second book in the Silo series by Hugh Howey, and that's Shift, Book 2. I really enjoyed Wool. If you look back at my video about that, you'll see I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to get into the second book, Shift. We'll be doing that in June. And then, of course, last but not least, to continue with my my Shorty King project, Nightmares and Dreamscapes. Another huge compilation volume released by Stephen King. I believe there's 23 short stories in this book, and I mean, it's well over 700 pages. Yeah. So this will be the next book in my Shorty King Project series. All right, so that's out of the way. That's for June. So now let's get into Stephen King, 4 Past Midnight. This is another compilation novel housing 4 novella-sized stories. This was originally published in September of 1990. That's when I got this actually for Christmas from my mother. It is a first. Most of my Stephen Kings actually are first. I've just been lucky with that. But anyways, 1990 this came out. My version, or this version, has 763 pages. On Goodreads it has a 3.95 right now. Just to let you know, I give it a 3, but we'll discuss that as we go along. So let's start off with the first story in this is the Langeliers. And I don't know, I don't know if I would say that this is the most popular of the stories that came out of this book. But definitely this or Secret Garden, Secret Window probably. But the Langeliers, it says, this is for Joe, another white knuckle flyer. So Stephen King has a fear of flying. And that's basically where this came out of. Let me tell you, let me talk about this real quick. There's this Flight or Fright, and this is 17 Turbulent Tales. This was edited by Stephen King and Bev Vincent. This compiles several short stories about flying and the fear of flying. Just inside the cover here, it says, featuring brand new stories by Joe Hill and Stephen King, as well as 14 classic tales and 1 poem from the likes of Richard Matheson, Ray Bradbury, Roald Dahl, Dan Simmons, and many others. I don't have this on my Shorty King list because it isn't just a compilation of Stephen King stories, although he does write a story in here and he edited it. I just wanted to show this. He does have this fear of flying and he likes to write about it from time to time. Of course, with Langeliers. All right, so a lot of people love Langeliers. It's their favorite short story. They even like the, well, we'll talk about that. So what is Langeliers? Again, it's a fear of flying type story. There's this pilot, his name's Brian Angle, and he had just made a long transatlantic flight, I guess from Tokyo to Colorado, where he gets off the plane, he finds out that his ex-wife has passed away and he needs to go to Boston. So he jumps on a red-eye flight to Boston and he's so freaking tired that he falls asleep. As the flight begins to take off, beforehand, one of the stewardesses, flight attendants, tells him, wow, there's a weird occurrence over the desert. We are seeing the Aurora Borealis over the desert. And he's like, wow, that's strange. But he's super tired. He goes to sleep. He gets awoken by a young girl screaming at the top of her lungs, and that is a young blind girl named Dinah. And when he wakes up, her screaming also wakes up several other passengers, and there's only 10 people left on the whole flight. The pilot's gone, everybody's gone, the stewardesses, everybody's gone. They come to find out that all the people that are still on the plane were asleep, and then when they woke up, they were the only ones left on the plane. So we've got Brian Angle, we've got Dinah, we've got a bank manager named Craig Toomey, who really becomes the antagonist of the story. We've got an English diplomat, or is he a diplomat? Special forces, something. Nick Hopewell. We've got a teacher, Laurel Stevenson, a writer, of course. Bob Jenkins, got to be a writer in the story. A recovering drug addict, Bethany Sims. A young violinist, Albert Kausner. A businessman, Rudy Warwick. I had to write all these names down. A mechanic, Don Gaffney. And my favorite character in the whole story, a passed out drunk in the back seat. Yep, this dude is passed out drunk the whole time. Doesn't ever see anything, hear anything, wake up, or anything. My favorite character of the whole story. Yeah, so when they wake up, of course, they see there's no other passengers, there's no pilots, and thankfully he's a pilot so he can fly the plane. They're going to Boston. As they're flying, they don't see any lights on, they don't see any activity on the ground, earth below them. For some reason, he diverts the plane from Boston to Bangor, Maine, airport in Bangor, Maine, I'm very familiar with. And that's kind of where we go with the story. Craig Toomey really needs to get to Boston, and he is actually psychotic. He's crazy. He just gets worse and worse as the time goes on. They do land in Bangor. There's some noises. Dinah, who is blind, has hypersensitivity in her other senses and can hear really well, and hears this noise like static or something, and it seems to be getting closer, coming to them. Eventually we do see these are creatures that are big spherical creatures with nasty sharp teeth, scary as hell. Craig calls them the Langeliers from a story that his father used to tell him to scare him when he was a kid. Anyways, I don't want to give too much of it away. I'm not going to talk too much on this anymore because I totally dislike this story. I've never liked it. When I read it originally in 1990, I didn't like it. When I reread it in the past, I didn't like it. I didn't like it now. They did adapt this into a 2-part TV movie for ABC back in 1994. If you remember seeing that, Bronson Pinchot was in it, and he was horrible. The TV series was god-awful. I tried to watch it recently after reading this. Couldn't even do it. I don't know why people love this so much, to be honest with you. There is a lot of continuity errors in it. Some just pacing is weird, where these characters go off and then they're in another place, then you don't know how they got there. There's one scene where the blind girl's walking towards Toomey and he's gonna kill her, and everyone else is just standing there watching, but they can't run up and protect her. Just things like that, MacGuffins in the story that I just never appreciated. And even the imagery, I never appreciated. He does do his normal job of developing some of these characters to the extent he can in a novella. But again, not one of my favorites. If you loved it, that's awesome. All right, let's just move on because we have to go to the next story, which is Secret Window, Secret Garden. Okay, so Secret Window, Secret Garden, for me, probably the best overall story of the 4 in the book, although for some reason not my favorite, but I think probably the best written story in this book. It's very similar, almost too similar to The Dark Half, which was the novel published before this. Same premise. This is Mort Rainey. He's, of course, an author in Maine. Common subject. He's recently gone through a divorce. Very sad divorce for him. So he's chosen to leave the home that they share, he and his ex-wife, and move to their lakefront property. Now he's hoping just to get away, to recover from the divorce and do some writing, but it just doesn't happen. He just really starts this deep dive into a very dark depression and eventually into psychosis. One of the driving factors is, while he's there, there's a knock at his door, There's a man at his door with a very southern accent, and this man is John Shooter from Mississippi, and he showed up on the doorstep. He's a cool character. He's kind of pissed off, but smarter than he appears. He looks like he's just some down south mud farmer with a heavy accent, maybe slow in his speaking style. But he accuses Mort of plagiarizing his story, Secret Window, Secret Garden. Now, Mort, of course, tells him to get lost, F you, blah, blah, blah. They get into a little heated discussion. The dude leaves the manuscript for Secret Window, Secret Garden on the back stairs, and Mort doesn't really see it. Mort kind of blows it off. His housekeeper sees it, puts it on the table. Later on, he sees it, he reads through it, and holy crap, it's almost identical to a short story that he had written called The Sowing Season. And now he's freaking out. What the hell's going on here? The guy comes back, says, you're going to pay for this. I want you to pay for this. He doesn't tell him right off what he wants him to do to pay for it. But again, they have more heated conversations as this guy kind of starts stalking him. But he kind of tries to trick the guy up. He says, so when did you publish this? He gives him a date, and in his mind he's thinking, oh man, see, he must have just copied my story and saw that publication in that short story compilation that it was published in, but it was originally published in Ellery Queen magazine 2 years prior. So he thinks he's got the guy. Well, madness ensues after that. I mean, you start getting into hallucinations, blackouts, murder, fire, all kinds of things. Again, not going to give it all away. It's a good story. The 4 stories in this book are okay, in my opinion. I'd take it or leave it. Now, this story, unfortunately, for me, is too formulaic. You can see it coming. You know what's going to happen. Even kind of similar to Langeliers as well. I think a lot of these books, these stories, all 4 of these stories in this novel are really kind of rehashes of Twilight Zone episodes. I don't think there's anything unique in here. I've seen people say, oh, how unique this was. I'm like, how can this be unique when he just published a book, you know, The Dark Half, which is almost the same subject. Langeliers is very similar to some Twilight Zone episodes. I don't think there's anything unique anyways in this novel. But aside from that, so this story, though, was adapted into a movie in 2004, and it was called Secret Garden. Actually, one of the few times where I will tell you that the movie or TV adaptation is better than the story. They changed it up a bit, but it's better. They've got good actors. Johnny Depp is in it. John Turturro is great in it. Maria Bello is in it. Even Timothy Hutton is in the movie. I actually like the movie much better than the story. Now, this kind of story, though, comes from, look this up if you can. There was a time where a man broke into Stephen King's home, and his wife Tabitha was home, and he had a bomb strapped to him, and he was threatening to blow everything up if he doesn't get, his due acknowledgement for the story Misery. He claimed that Misery was stolen from a story that his aunt had written, and it's kind of where you got to read the story. I believe Tabitha was like, okay, sit down, you look like you're hungry, like made him lunch or something. This guy's got this bomb, but it wasn't a bomb, it was a bunch of pencils tied together with like paper clips on the, ridiculous. But maybe that's where he got his inspiration for this story, I don't know. But anyways, not my favorite of his short stories, but probably the best in this compilation. All right, let's move on to the next one. The Library Policeman. Okay, so there's a lot to kind of unpack with this story. I'm not going to get into it too much. This story is about a gentleman named Sam Peebles. He's an insurance guy. He gets asked to give a speech at his local Rotary Club because a magician had to back out for some reason. So they ask him. He says okay, but he's really nervous. He has some fear of getting up and talking in front of people. Not a lot of confidence. So he eventually finds his way to the local library, public library, for help. He goes there for help, and he meets this older woman, this librarian. Her name's Ardelia Lortz, and she helps him find two books that should be able to help him give the speech. Now, it's kind of weird. He sees some weird posters on the wall that he doesn't think is appropriate maybe for the library setting, or especially if young people were in there. And he discusses this with her a bit, but she kind of just, pushes him aside. Now, he doesn't have a library card, so he has to sign up, get a library card, all this. And she's kind of very strict, kind of almost robotic, he says in her speaking style, very direct and short to the point. But she does tell him, hey, if you don't return these books on time, I'm going to have to sick the library policeman on you. And you don't want that. Well, of course, it goes from there. As you can assume, he does not return the books on time, and horror ensues. He goes back finally to the library to talk, maybe just pay for the books, and the library looks completely different. It's got a drop ceiling now, fluorescent lights. It didn't before. Nobody's ever heard of Ardelia. They've got young college kids working the counter. Totally different. We eventually find out that Ardelia Lortz is dead. She passed away years ago through some nefarious activities I won't go into. Issues. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a slow burn in a story, but this book, this novella, about the first half of it, really was a drudge to get through. Very slow, didn't seem to be going anywhere, didn't seem to have any idea where it was going, wasn't drawing me in. I was not vested in it at all. Then about the halfway point, it actually starts getting pretty decent. Oh, now here comes some of the horror elements. Here comes some of the tension rising, building with the story. It was getting better. I think he found his groove in this writing. It was going well. And then we have to talk about it. There's a rape scene of a young boy. And it is so graphically horrible. I don't know how a person in their brain could write this, put it in a story, publish it. I mean, he's taken rage away because it was a school shooting. Whew, just this one scene which goes on way too long, too graphically, is not needed at all. He could have alluded to it different. There's much better things you can do to mention a rape scene without going to the extent he did in this story, and it's literally gross. If you have any triggers, please do not read this story. It's ridiculous, it's not needed, it's uncalled for, and it kind of ruins the whole story that had just started to get going well. And then after that, it goes into one of those stories where Stephen King apparently doesn't know how to end the story, and it just drags on and on and on and on, way too long. There's a portion in here where he talks about the wind for like 3 pages. I mean, it doesn't advance the story, doesn't do anything for the story. The wind is blowing, yeah, but it blows the door, and they got to hold the door open because the wind is so. He just goes on and on about the wind. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on here, but it was not good. Absolutely, probably the worst story out of the 4 in here, just for that reason. But aside from that, it was going pretty good. It got to the point where it picked up pace and it was going, and then he had to do that. I don't know what the hell his mind was. We can talk about that a little bit. The time period when he wrote this, and his drug and alcohol use maybe affected this. I don't know. If you have any triggers, just don't read this story. Sorry, Stephen. Let's go on to the last story in the book. So finally we have the Sundog. So the Sundog starts off with this young boy, Kevin Delvan, and he's having a birthday. It's his 15th birthday. For his birthday, he gets an awesome gift. He gets a Polaroid camera. Not just any Polaroid camera. This is the Sun 660. See what he did there? 660. It's a real camera. Used to exist. The Sun 660. I think he's playing on the 666 thing. Anyways, it's a Polaroid camera. He loves it. It's great. But every time he takes a picture, the picture that comes out is not the picture that he took. It is of this scary, mean-looking black dog. And every time he takes another picture, it kind of advances the scene that you're watching this black dog as it turns and starts snarling and looking at the person taking the picture. And it doesn't matter who, where he takes a picture of who or what. He just sees this black dog. He thinks there's something strange going on, something weird going on. Eventually, he talks to some people and he gets directed to go see Reginald Pop Merrill. Yep, so you're going to see some people in here from Needful Things, some Easter eggs and stuff. Pretty cool. It's another Castle Rock story. So Pops has a junk shop in downtown Castle Rock. He goes to Pops to see what he thinks of it. If anybody knows, of any weirdness, it's going to be Pop. And Pop kind of sees maybe that there could be some money made here. He kind of tries to talk Kevin into destroying this evil camera. And eventually they get there, but he buys another camera that's the same camera and does the old switcheroo. Kevin thinks he destroys the camera, but Pops kept the camera because Pops thinks he can make some money from these paranormal obsessed people. These people that watch all these ghost TV shows and collect paranormal paraphernalia. And he thinks he can make a lot of money off this. He eventually finds out that everybody thinks he's full of shit and he can't get rid of it. But as he continues to own this camera and take pictures and seeing this scene unfold, he becomes obsessed, maybe even possessed by the spirit or whatever is in this camera. Kevin eventually has dreams, realizes that the camera was not actually destroyed and that Pop ripped him off. He tells his father. His father has a history with Pop as well. They start going to look for Pop and the camera, and it goes from there. I'll tell you, of the research I've done after, again, I read this, it's probably the least liked story of the four. It's probably my favorite. I think it's pretty scary. I think it's a slow, what do they call it? Quiet horror. It's kind of a slow burn, not like the library policeman. But it gets scarier and scarier and scarier. Pop's, obsession and compulsion and insanity around this camera, the scenes, how they put them together and flip them almost like a movie, make a video of it. I thought it was interesting. Shorter of the stories in the book. Again, most people don't like it. I kind of like it. I don't know why. Yeah, Secret Garden, Secret Window probably is the best written story in the collection, but for fun, I enjoyed Sundog. But again, some bloatedness, some stupid crap that Stephen King does. That towards the end, there's a scene where Pop goes to the store, and it's like 5 pages of talking about this young girl working behind a counter and her boobs in her ass. I don't understand why he does this so frequently in his stories. I mean, people have complained a lot about, some of the gratuitous sex that he does. You can go back to It and the Losers Clubs. We all know about that. Again, the library policeman. I don't know what his thing is. I think maybe he thinks if he sensationalizes some of his stories with sex, gratuitous sex, and things like that, it will bring in more people. But he's already one of the most famous, popular writers in history. So I don't know why he does it, but he continues to do it. Now he's even added politics into his writing. I mean, that's up to you. Still one of my favorite writers, even though I don't like everything he does. This, of course, I gave it a 3. I gave it a 3 because it's entertaining. It is. And if you're a completionist like me, you'll want to read it, and you may love the Langeliers or Secret Garden. I just don't. This is one of my least liked books that Stephen King has ever published. I did give it a 3. I almost went lower, but there are some entertaining value to this. Just not my favorite. Again, there's some triggers in these stories. Be careful if you read it. I'm not going to say don't read it, but just not one of my favorites. I know people talk about this time period. So people talk about from like Tommyknockers to Rose Madder, where he really may not have had all his faculties, doing a lot of drugs, a lot of drinking, publishing some weird stuff, really weird stuff. This is, of course, right in the middle of that, and I can see it. I will say, though, I have a love-hate relationship with Insomnia. I like Insomnia. I think there's some really good things in there. It's about 500 pages too big, but it's a huge book. It informs some other things. There's balloons. I think it informs the Holly Gibney stories. And I have a softness in my heart for Rose Madder too. It's a weird ass book, but I enjoyed it. Maybe it was the time I read it. But anyways, that's 4 Past Midnight. Take it or leave it. I hope you found some entertaining value in my videos. I know my videos run long. Please just skip ahead if you want to. But anyways, next we will be doing Nightmares and Dreamscapes for my Shorty King Project. And we will be continuing my read-alongs with Grozz on GKBC and going into June. So, as usual, if you find any entertaining value in my videos, please like, subscribe, leave me comments, and until next time, peace out.